This presentation is about consumer price inflation and in particular how to measure consumer price inflation. Consumer price inflation is possibly the most important type of inflation that we measure in the economy because it affects the entire population, because everyone is a consumer. And when the price of goods that consumers buy rises, it changes the behavior of all consumers, of all households. So it's important that we understand how we measure consumer price inflation. Well, by consumer goods, we mean goods that are bought by households regularly, such as clothes, food, entertainment, medicines, etc. So these are things that households buy in order to live and in order to enjoy themselves. So now that we have understood consumer goods, we know that we have to calculate a single number called the Consumer Price Index that is going to summarize or sum up the prices of all the goods that consumers buy on a regular basis. We can do this in 7 steps. The first step is to choose a year that we are going to use as our so-called base year. That is our year for comparison with other years. So this is the year that we're going to use as our sort of starting point in order to consider how prices rise from this year or compared to what they were in this year. And this is called our base year. Having chosen our base year, we then collect information on prices of goods bought by households in that base year. So we measure how much clothes cost, how much food costs, etc. in that particular year, in that base year. Having collected all this information about prices in the base year, we then turn those prices into a particular type of average price called the weighted average. The details of how we calculate a weighted average are not really important, but it is not an arithmetic average. It's not a normal average. It's an average that reflects how much of our money we spend on different goods that we buy. And this is why it's called a weighted average. So now we have the weighted average price of the goods that we buy in the base year. And because it's the base year we're talking about, we give a value, an automatic value, to this weighted average. We just call it 100. And the 100 is the index number for the base year. The base year's index number is always 100. We then repeat this whole calculation of the weighted average for goods that we buy the next year. So we measure prices again the next year and turn them into a weighted average. And for the second year, we find the index number using the weighted averages the weighted average of prices that we have calculated. So by comparing the two index numbers in 2 successive years, we calculate the inflation rate between those 2 years. So for example, let's take an example. If in our base year, the weighted average of prices of goods that we bought was £112, we would call that number 100 because that is the index value for our base year. Let's take the next year. Imagine that prices had gone up and the weighted average of goods that we buy, of the prices of goods that we buy, had risen to £136. We would convert this into an index number by dividing 136 by 112 and multiplying by the base year index value, which was 100. And this would mean that we'd get an index number of 121 for the second year. And finally, in order to calculate the rate of inflation between the base year and the second year, we would take the difference between the index numbers in the 2 years. The first year's index number was 100, the second year's index number was 121, and this would give us an inflation rate of 21%. So therefore, in summary, we need to calculate the prices, we need to collect the prices of goods that we buy as households, and we need to convert those prices into some kind of weighted average price. When we've done that, then for the base year, we call that weighted average 100, and in subsequent years, in the years that follow, we do exactly the same thing. We calculate a weighted average, and we compare the weighted average price of goods that we buy in following years to 100. And we compare it to 100, and we calculate a new index number. And by looking at the difference between the index numbers in 2 years, so we have the index in year 1 and the index in year 2, we get the inflation rate. By looking at the percentage difference between the index in 2 consecutive years. Now, I realize that this may seem a little bit complicated, but it gives you an idea that an index number is simply a number which is the weighted average price of goods that households buy. It's not the direct price, but it's compared with 100, which is the weighted average value in the base year. And this is the way we measure inflation, by the percentage difference in 2 index numbers in 2 successive periods. They could be 2 years or 2 other periods that we choose, such as 2 successive months, etc.